everyone to the Farming Forecaster webinar. And before I get started, I'll just do a bit of a quick introduction. For those of you who are new to this tool and to what we're doing in our project. So my name's Tim Ackroyd. I'm the Ag Project Officer for NRM South and as part of our land team. And I'm running this project on Farming Forecaster and the previous pilot on Farming Forecaster, so I'll give you a bit of an intro to the tool. Oh, someone else is logged on. I'm just going to admit them. So yes, so this I'll give you an introduction to everybody else. So we've got Phil Graham from Graham Advisory. So he's a livestock advisor. He's worked on the development of Farming Forecaster and worked with producers on this tool in New South Wales for a number of years. So we're working with Phil on our Farming Forecaster project, and we've worked with him on the previous pilot. So he'll be helping us set up the tool and run a series of training workshops and activities, including these series of webinars. So we should have Marek, but he may not be able to attend. Marek from AgLogic. He may be dialing in a minute. He was at the previous meeting we had at 12:30, and he's from AgLogic, and they are working with us to get the soil probes in the ground and to provide us some technical advice on the sites. So part of the Farming Forecaster tool are soil moisture probes, which I'll explain a little bit later. We've also got Yolanda and James, who are part of the NRM South Land Program team. So Yolanda is going to be managing the chat function. So I'll give us a bit of an intro, and then I'll hand over to Phil. But during the whole webinar, if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat, or if you really want to ask a question that's pertinent to what we're discussing at the time, please put your hand up as well, whichever way you're comfortable with. So Farming Forecaster, just to familiarise people with Farming Forecaster, it's a decision support tool developed for graziers by graziers. It was developed in New South Wales, and it's a culmination of many years of using soil moisture probes and using a tool called GrassGrow to generate a pasture forecast 3 to 4 months ahead of time. So it gives you an idea of what the pasture trend is, and that information has been around for a while, but it's never been automated and on an easy to understand platform. So Farming Forecaster is basically that. It's taking information on soil moisture, rainfall, and pasture production, and putting it into a format so people can actually understand how rainfall and soil moisture affect the long range pasture forecast. So the tool gives you all that information in a publicly available setting. So you can go on Farming Forecaster today and you can look at any Farming Forecaster site that's been set up in Australia. So this product, this tool, came about through discussions with the East Coast Primary Producers Association a couple of years ago, after they had 3 years of drought, and they wanted to run a pilot on this tool. So we got together with NRM North, and we developed a pilot where we established 13 sites across the East Coast, Fingal and part of the Midlands, and that's been going really well. We've got the sites up and running and lots of good information for farmers to look at and to make some decisions around. But we knew there was a need in many of the other low rainfall areas of Tasmania. So we actually got some funding to do another 30 sites. So we're now in the second phase, if you like, with this statewide rollout. And so North and ourselves are working together to establish 30 sites from places up to the Fingal Valley, right down to the Coal Valley, and Derwent catchment as well. So it's an exciting project. We're looking forward to working with everyone on this statewide project. So today, though, we're going to be talking about specific sites.
Tim, a bit further than Fingal Valley.
Sorry?
A bit further north than Fingal Valley.
Did I say Fingal Valley? I meant
Yeah.
Flinders Island. Flinders Island is what I meant. Sorry. Yeah, so today we're going to discuss the sites that we've established in the Midlands and part of the Fingal Valley. So Phil was going to discuss, give a little bit of an intro into how to interpret the data from the tool. And then we're going to look at some specific sites and compare different trends over those areas. And then there's be an opportunity to discuss that information amongst ourselves. So, so I will hand over to Phil now, and I'll need to share the screen so we can start the presentation. So I'm handing over to you now, Phil.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, what I'm going to do is at the start, I'm going to run through a few general issues about looking at the site, understanding the site, and then I'll get down into looking at about 7 or 8 individual sites. So we might go to the next slide, please, Tim. Rightio. Look, one of the key things with Farming Forecaster is what you're really doing is comparing historical data. So anywhere on the presentation where you've got shaded data, it's historical. And by that, we mean it's coming from 30 years of weather data. So the weather data from the 1st of January 1992 to the end of 2021. That's the daily weather data we use in the model to generate animal or pasture data. So the screen we're looking at present is available green herbage. So when we run the model, we generate 30 years of pasture data, and then we're able to go in and look at it for any period of the year. So this is just an example. The planting period you're looking at present is November, December, January, and February. So the shaded data is historical. The lines, the coloured lines, are the forecast. And the black line is what happened during the month of November. I just want to, the arrows between the coloured lines and the shaded is just putting them in context. So the red line is the 10% line, 1 in 10 chance of occurring. Where's its equivalent in the shaded data? Well, its equivalent is where the white meets the red. 25%, 1 in 4 chance. Where's its equivalent? It's where the red hits the brown. The yellow is the 50%. It's where the brown hits the green. And the 90% equivalent is the top of the green. So one of the things you look at straight away is how does, say in the forecast, how does the 10% or 1 in 10 chance of the forecast compared to the 1 in 10 chance historically? And in this graph we're looking at, which is Tasmanian data for the month for November, the forecast, the 1 in 10 forecast is way, way above the historical values. So straight away you look at that, it's telling us that the current position is well above what we experienced before, but even the forecast is running a lot higher than where we would be historically. Quite frankly, that's the place we want to be. You don't be when there will be times if we stay together long enough. There's going to be times when those forecast lines are going to be sitting under the historical values. They're the years where we've got to make very hard decisions. Next screen, please, Tim. Now we generate this forecast data, there those coloured lines going out, by 2 methods. And you'll notice in the blue section next to the graph, under the word forecast, we've got a button that says climatology, and we've got a button which says access S. What do we do with climatology? We take those 30 years of actual weather data recorded at that locality. Again, it's the 1992 to 2021 years. That's what we use to generate the forecast. So the forecast is, we know what the conditions were on the 30th of November. We know what soil moisture was. We know what herbage mass was. We know what animal live weights were. That's the starting point. And then we run what ifs. What if we got the weather over the next 4 months? What if we got the weather that occurred from the 1st of December 1992 through to the end of February 1993? and that'll give us a pasture curve. And we do that another 30 times. So we get 30 lots of data, and then we present it as percentiles. So you can choose whether you at present the 10, the 50, and the 90 are highlighted, but you can turn those off and just look at other ones. What does Access S mean? Access S is the name of the program that Bureau Meteorology use to generate forecasts into the future. So the Access model takes account of current conditions that apply around Australia. What's the Indian Ocean doing? What's the Pacific Ocean doing? What's the Great Southern Ocean doing? What's the Tasman Sea doing? How strong, what's the wind directions, trade winds? How strong are they? What's cloud cover? All the sort of info that they're picking up all the time goes into Access model. And every day, with all that input going in, the Access model generates 11 data sets of potential daily weather, and in our case, for the next 4 months. So they generate 11 every day. Because we use 30 historical years, we really need to use the same for the forecast. So for the new run that was just created on 1st of December, the CSIRO computer in Hobart picks up the 11 files the Access produced on the 28th of November, picks up 11 files that Access produced on the 29th, picks up 11 files that Access produced on the 30th. So therefore, we've got 33 years of potential future weather for the next 4 months. So climatology, in summary, uses 30 years of actual data that has occurred in those localities. Access uses 33 different future weather sets generated by BOM. Both of those I think are of equal value. So I don't say one is better than the other. They're both something you want to look at, and we'll look at those in more detail at each side a bit later. Next, please. Just jumping around. Now, this is one of the moisture probes, and most likely from our earlier discussion, we're 99% down the path of fixing up what the problem was. So here's a moisture probe that I downloaded on Sunday for a Fingal Valley site. The 3 top layers, as you can see, have all gone to 0, and there's been a massive change. Over 7 days, moisture's dropped by 30%. You just don't get drops of 30% in moisture that quickly. Excuse me. Also, I was looking at this site maybe a week before, and there was numbers in the 30s and 40s. So straight away that ran alarm bells for me that those 3 values at 10, 20, and 30 weren't right, and we think we know why they aren't right, and hopefully they'll be corrected in a couple of days. But what I wanted to do was go and check what the probe's telling me against what the model is producing. So for every site, even if you don't have a probe on the left, you can go into the model under the projected pasture. There's the big blue button that says more pasture detail. You click on that and you come down to a graph like this one, which is plant available soil moisture. So what's it telling us? It takes the current soil moisture averaged over 3 days. So that's the red dot. And it compares that moisture against the soil moisture for those same 3 days over the other previous 30 years. So we've got the box, and with the whiskers either side, the line the line across the box towards the bottom is the median value. So 15 years out of the 30 would be at that line or lower. The top of the box is 75%, and the top of the whisker is 95%. So currently at that site, soil moisture is well above where you would normally expect moisture to be for this time of year. So to me, what we're seeing on the right and what we're seeing on the left doesn't add up. If you look at many other sites, there will be a lot of similarities between those two. So even if you don't have a probe, you can go in and get an idea of how current moisture sits against historical moisture. So anyhow, Marek's going to send some information around, and we'll just change some of our points. Why is this an issue? When this probe went in, it went into a paddock that had no pasture in it. the pasture was sown. We've now got a pasture, and some of the lower and higher points we use to generate these percentages, we've now got new values because of that. And we'll put those new values in, and the percentages will in fact get back to a more normal value. Next, thanks, Tim. While we're on the moisture probes, some probes in Tassie have now been in the ground since October 2021. So the graph up the top is the one that you will see always if you go into more probe details. Remember, you have these 3 big blue buttons on the main screen: view network, which shows you all the sites, view more probe details, more pasture details. I click on the more probe details. The graph at the top is one that you would have seen before. That's a graphic representation of what's happened to soil moisture over the last 12 months. Now, just above that graph on the right, there's a black letters that said compare to year. And in the drop-down box next to it, it said previous year. So that bottom graph is now showing us the data in the previous year. Now, this probe only started giving information on the 26th of October 2021. So the previous year is just showing us the data available, which is for those 2 and a bit months. So the end in the bottom graph, the right-hand end of the bottom graph, is the start of the left-hand end on the top graph. So it's as you go on, this becomes very useful, and producers in New South Wales who have got 3 and 4 years data to compare against, they make good use of that. So what can we see straight away is that soil moisture at this time last year in December had dropped to lower levels than what it is at present. Things had started dropping earlier on than what they've done this year. So that's a feature that increasingly you'll be able to use, and it'll become of a lot more value, say in autumn and winter next year, when there'll be a good data set to compare against. Next, please, Tim. Rightio. What's this one about? This one's about the warning. So above the pasture graph, which is half cut off, warning: the drought lot is active at some point during this time period. So it's a feature we're able to build into the program to some degree to catch up with what producers were already doing. Increasingly, producers are using ground cover triggers to move stock off pasture into containment areas to protect pastures and soils. Very logical and sensible thing to do. So we can now do it in the program. So we've got ground cover triggers. When they're hit, stock are moved into a drought lot. Next slide, please, Tim. So if you look at the 3 pie charts, the green is to represent the stock are on pasture, and the red's to represent the time the stock are in a drought lot. So the top one's 10%, middle one's 40%, the bottom one's 90% in the drought lot. But regardless of which ones those might occur or any point in between, all you'll get is this drought lot warning. The drought lot warning for the bottom pie chart with all the red is no different. When we first brought this in, it only took 1 day for the drought lot warning to be activated, and we realised that was just over the top. So a change has just been made. The drought lot warning won't be activated until more than 10% of the time during the planting period, which is 4 months. It'll have to be more than 10% of that time stock are in the drought lot before you'll get the warning time. But as we can see, the warning itself doesn't tell us anything about how severe the situation might be. It's the graph at the bottom, the very last graph. You click on the more pasture detail, the very last graph is called total supplement fed-in drought lot. This is the one that tells you whether I've got a major problem I need to be starting to think about, or it's very minor. So in the example below, the adult stock, what that graph's saying, percentage up the left-hand side, across the bottom, total kilograms of fed to an animal in the planting period. So it's the total fed to an animal in the 4 months. This is saying there's 100% chance we'd be feeding about 55 kilos to the animals. There's a very small chance we might feed 100 kilos. Because we've run it over 30 years, we've got 30 outcomes, and that's why we can present it in this graph. So that's sort of a substantial nature. So, yeah, that'd be one where you're starting to sit down and think about, am I going to take some actions in terms of destocking, selling stock, using drought lots, whatever. Sometimes you could go to a site and the figure down the bottom, in fact, instead of being 10 units of 10 kilos, it might be units of 1 kilo or half a kilo. What it's telling you is you might only have a 20% chance of feeding 2 kilos to animals over the ensuing 4 months. In other words, the chance that you're going to have to do something abnormal is exceedingly small, and basically I can sit and relax. So this is not something we've had to look at, and it's not something we're going to be looking at in the next 6, maybe 12 months. It's something that will be there, which we will have to pay attention to in the future. Our desire is it'll be a long time in the future. Next one, please. If we just go back up to the pasture graph, and this is from one of the drier Midlands sites. So again, we've got the shading is the historical value of green, and the lines are the forecast. They're not quite right, so we'll look at those, talk about it more a bit later on. But you'll notice both the historical and the forecast drop off quickly. What's going on? Pastures get to the end of their growing cycle and they will go from green to dead very quickly. We see that, often you look out from your homestead and at the start of the week it's green, at the end of the week it's brown. So a lot of places are just starting to get into that realm. Pastures have finished their growth cycle, and that's what's really shutting them down, moving them from green to dead. It's not because of moisture. So these sudden drop-offs we'll be seeing on all the graphs is a reflection of that. How much they shut off will be controlled by what's the pasture mix we've used to set the farm system up. And for this locality, we used, if we hit the more pasture detail, a summary of the grass grow model that we set up is there, and under one of the headings is pasture. So for this site, the pasture is made up of annual grass and subclover, so 2 annuals, which will have already finished their life, and the annual grass would already have moved into its dead phase, and phalaris, which has a very strong summer dormancy, so it'll run to head, it'll shut down, and then it'll stay dormant for a period before it'll break back into life the next year. From some other sites that we're going to look at, their pasture mix is different. They might have species that are capable of growing over summertime if there's moisture there. So if you look at a site, you say, oh, geez, why is that shut off so quickly? Why have we got such a long period with no green? You need to go over into the more pasture detail, look at the data from the model and see what the pasture mix is. That'll be important. Now, obviously, now as extensively in the Midlands, this area will have irrigation. Now, this does not take account of irrigation. This is purely dry land responses. So the reason we've got such a pronounced shut off and no green feed is because of the way the info we received from the producer, annual pasture with phalaris, which means we often will have a summer with no green available. Thanks, Tim. The other one, this is stock weight, comes out under the more pasture detail button again. And people might say, well, why is there no information in December or early January? Well, if we go over to the right-hand side and read under the summary button, the potential live weight of weaned male progeny. So at this locality, weaning doesn't occur to the 10th of January, so that's why all the data starts at the 10th of January. Prior to that, they're on mum. This graph is not giving us details of the weights on mum. It's a weaned progeny. The shaded is the historical, the lines are the tactical run again, and really those lines are saying you're running at the upper boundary of where things are historically. The graph below tackles the same question a bit differently, and this time we get some output out of the females and males. Again, I've said we get 30 years of data, so we get 30 years of weights that these animals might finish the end of March at. If we look at the female one, what it's saying is the lightest values of those 30 years might be around 37.5, and the heaviest weight we might get out of those 30 years is 42. The vast bulk of the weights sit between 38 and 40 for the females. Same logic for the males. So that's giving you some info. Obviously, the absolute weight itself is influenced by, well, in the model, we can't model animal health problems. So this is giving an indication of what is possible from the pasture, provided worms and other minerals aren't pulling things back. Next, please. Again, I've just put this one up as a reminder of the importance of checking the data. So if we look at the left-hand side, I downloaded that data on Sunday night. The critical thing is the bit in red up top under the word probe, last updated Wednesday, 9:30 p.m. So even though I downloaded this on Sunday night, the central database and the program had not received any data from this probe since the previous Wednesday. On the right was what I downloaded last night, and the probe has communication between the probe and the hosting network has obviously been reactivated. It could well have been that Telstra was working on a tower and the tower was out of operation, which that probe was using to send info. It's all back up and running now, and we see. So when I downloaded that at about 6 o'clock last night on Monday, the last time they received some data would have been 2 o'clock Monday afternoon. So you can just see in that period of about 4 or 5 days that the 10 centimetres has gone from 100 back to 66. So it's really starting to pull moisture out of that top due to rapid pasture growth. Thanks, Tim. Rightio. We're now going to go through the sites in the Fingal Valley and down through the Midlands, finish down on Bruny. On the right-hand side, on the left-hand side will always be climatology. You can see the radio button with the blue dot in the middle of it. The right-hand side is access. Same property up the top. This is the data that was produced by the computer on the 1st of December this year. So first thing I look at is where are the values sitting compared to historical values? Well above. Rapid drop off both the historical and forecast, but again, that's driven by the stage of the pasture more than anything else. If I go over to the right-hand side, the access, the blue line has moved a bit wider than it is on the left. On the left, the red, yellow, and blue are very close together. On the access one, it's a bit wider apart. I don't think, I don't read too much into that. The one thing I have noticed and looked at with the access one is at the back half of March, we can see both the 90 and the 50% line kicking up quite quickly in terms of where green herbage mass might be. And it's the 50% line that interests me more, because that's a 1 in 2 chance of occurring. And those odds sound a lot better to me than 1 in 10, which is the blue line. Now, this is telling us of green pasture. So if we're getting a response in pasture in late March, that would have to have been driven by decent rainfall events in late February. Interestingly enough, at all the sites on the East Coast, there's the same kick up there. So let's keep an eye on that as we move through the Midland sites. Now, Tim was on the earlier webinar and made a comment that This is looking more positive than what he says his place is at present. At present, his country has been severely waterlogged. So there's some country he couldn't graze that's been shut up. And therefore the country he has grazed has had to carry stocking rates which are most likely 50 or 60% higher than what we had in running the model. So his grazed pastures are substantially shorter than this due to a much higher stocking rate. So previously for 12 months, the model and what Tim was seeing was matching up pretty well. We've just been through a very, very abnormal spring, and that's caused some divergence. I'd be fairly confident that maybe by the end of January, the two, what Tim has on his property and what we're seeing on the side, will get closer and closer together, because those paddocks of his, which have had really high grazing pressure because that's the only place he could put the cows, they're going to keep growing further into December than what is being shown in the forecast, where things are dropping off quickly. Thank you. We just moved now from east to west down the Fingal Valley, Speyside. Similar story, starting position well above historical high values, drops off quickly. We've spoken about that, driven by pasture, stage of pasture growth. Again, if we go over to the access model, there's a bit of a kick up in March, and I'll come back to that kick up in March at the end of the talk. So really, this is giving us a very similar response to what we saw from Killymoon. Next, please. We keep moving down now to the western edge of the Fingal Valley. Similar story in terms of herbage mass compared to historical, same rapid drop off. We move over to the access again, and we're getting that same kick in late March. So while the absolute pasture value numbers have changed as we've gone through the valley, the relative position of where current forecast is compared to history it's the same story. And quite frankly, that's almost a repeat of what we saw at the 4 sites on the East Coast. So a lot, and the fact that we're seeing a lot of sites behaving in similar manner adds to the confidence on each site. If we went up the Fingal Valley and we saw 3 radically different outcomes for the 3 sites, that starts putting some question marks into the mind. You know, we've got this big difference, therefore it's very sensitive to a locality. Whereas if we go here and we see the same logic, the same responses occur across the whole valley, people within the valley can have confidence that it's very relevant. It was the same. All the East Coast was basically behaving the same way. We've got the East Coast and the Fingal Valley behaving the same way. So it's giving us an indication that the position we're at has a higher degree of confidence about it because of the uniformity. Next one, please. Now we're out in the Perth region. To me, I'd say very similar to the Fingal. The starting point, instead of being in the white, sitting on the 90% boundary, which is still an incredibly good position to be. Drop off here isn't quite as quick. The forecast lines are still sitting well above their corresponding historical lines. So if you look at where the red forecast line is in climatology, it's miles above where the 10% historical line. In fact, it's above the 50% historical line. So that's telling us that even if things turn dry, the food we can expect on the place is well above what we would normally expect for this period. So if it's well above what we would normally expect for this period, the indications are you're not going to be required to take abnormal action into the future of the planning period. Again, if we go to the right-hand side, we're seeing a bit of a kick up on the at the end, just with the blue line, whereas in the Fingal we saw the yellow line going. Here it's just the blue. We'll come back to that kick a bit later. Next one, please. We're going down the valley. Now, a couple of things here. Lewisham site, again, we've got a starting point above historical positions, rapid drop off. We've spoken about that. Behaviour as you might expect. The access site, for some unknown reason, every month in Tasmania, we get a glitch in display. And what I mean by that is, if we look at the left-hand one, the three coloured lines start from the end of the black line. If we look at what's happened over on the access page, the coloured lines have started from the graph instead of the end of the black line. So all the three coloured lines have been moved 1 month to the left. They should all, you've got to pick those lines up and move them all 1 month to the right. Sorry, I keep thinking they've solved the problem, but each month it keeps reappearing. Apologies. Just for something different at this site, I didn't highlight the 50% line. I highlight the 75% line under the access one. And the interesting thing there is, if we look right at the end, which will be in late March, it appears to be graphically it's present in February, but if we shun it 1 month to the right, it'll be in late March. That late March kick up that we've seen elsewhere. Interesting thing to me is the green line's gone as strongly and as high as the blue line. Now, again, I'm a lot more, that's more positive to me, because the 75% is it's a 1 in 4 chance. Again, the odds of 1 in 4 are better than the blue line, which is a 1 in 10. So whether it's been on the east coast or through the Fingal Valley, and as we go down through the Midlands, we keep getting this signal for autumn of potentially good moisture early in that system to get autumn growth away, which is critical for Tasmanian production. So there's none of the stories have changed on any site we've looked at, in fact, today, but from what I've just shown you for this Midlands one. Next one, please. Again, we keep going down. We're most likely now at the dry site. Same story as before. Some of our absolute values have altered. Certainly the herbage mass, once we get into the Midlands, is a lot lower than the herbage mass in the better part of the Fingal Valley. But the trends, the relative performance of the forecast against historical, it's all the same. And again, in the access, we are seeing a kick up in that March period.
Just one thing, Phil. One thing, Phil,
yeah.
I noticed is with Rathani and Lewisham, the yellow and red lines are very, very tightly associated with each other.
Yeah, and really, it's a
yeah.
And I think, you know, we're in the driest part, and there are many years in that environment where in January, February, March, you don't have green food. You know,
yeah,
that's not unusual.
While we're looking at Rathani, Chris is here. I was just wondering whether Chris, you wanted to comment on the information you're seeing on the graph and what you're seeing on the farm.
Yeah, I think the graph's spot on with what we're seeing here as far as top of the growth curve. Yeah,
great.
We've grown the bulk of our feed now, and it's senescing and dropping down the other side pretty well. But yeah, I think I've added up 600 mils for the 11 months this year. So yeah, certainly well above average. Yeah, there in the rain, it's reflecting. Yeah, pretty similar to what we're seeing here in the graph.
Yeah.
Yeah, with our dry land country.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah,
no worries. Chris's comment's a good one, that, you know, senescing's going on. That's why there's that rapid drop. Remember, what we don't show you in Farming Forecaster is what's happening to the amount of dead on your pasture, on your property. So some people think, oh, look, I'm going to have bare ground. You are not having bare ground. It's dropping off. Your green might be very limited or very small, but you have got a corresponding increase in dead food, which we're not showing you. And I think the vast areas of Tassie, and it is no different in New South Wales and through Victoria, the issues this summer will be, how am I going to manage that bulk of dead feed and try and open that up to start allowing conditions for growth in autumn time, right? So managing dead feed, which is something that, you know, it's a bit to the side of farming forecaster, but that's going to be an issue that people are going to have to wrestle with. Which of the paddocks I'm going to try and knock down and open up. So if this spike of moisture comes in late February or March, I've got country that is in a growing state, and which of the paddocks I'm going to let go. We're going to most likely, we tried last year, we'll try harder this year up here of using a bit more, using fire as a tool to try and get rid of some herbage mass, because we're certainly seeing negative impacts of carrying over massive burdens of dead food. We've got some paddock country now that's been under a massive burden of dead food for 2 years, and it's not doing the pasture composition the world of good. So managing dead is something that's coming out of this presentation today that people are going to have to think about.
Just
Next
on
one.
that, Phil. Yeah, we've got a fair bit of subclover and trefoil burr at the bottom of the longer dry feed, and yeah, just using lambs in front of the big mob of ewes to try and get access to that first before we hit it with big mobs of ewes.
Yeah, very sensible. The thing, Peter, you made the comment earlier, there's no green. You got on this graph, if we extended the size of that graph, you might find that running through summer there might be up 50 or 100 kgs of green in the system. There might be this odd little bit of green here and there, which makes a huge difference to animal performance, especially young stock, which doesn't necessarily show up here because we've grown so much feed. Next one, please. What a difference 30 or 40 kilometres makes. So really all we've done now is gone up a bit and gone east to Stonehouse. Rainfall goes up now. Different species in the pasture, which has, we've got species here which have the capacity to grow if there's summer moisture available. So the graphs are quite different. Just highlights what we all know about Tassie. You can move a very small difference and get quite a big change in outcomes. But really, to me, the graphs physically look different, but the story to me is the same. With our current position is very high up the scale. We're getting a drop off, and it's this one doesn't drop quite as severely, and that's more a function of where it is in pasture type. But really, the story's exactly the same. You're in a good position, and the forecast is saying that that's not going to change. Ben and Beck have most likely got the same issue Chris just talked about. How am I going to manage this green? How am I going to manage the dead feed such that my pasture growth come autumn and winter next year isn't too compromised? There isn't quite the kick up on Stonehouse as we're seeing on some of the other ones in March, and that could well be a function of the fact that they might have done a bit more growth through February and March themselves, just the nature of where they are in their pasture species. Last one, please, Tim. And we drop down onto North Bruny. Again, the graphs themselves have slightly different patterns due to the difference in locality and pasture types, but the overall message isn't the same. Currently, we're sitting at very high levels. Yes, it's going to senesce and move from the green to the dead pool, but forecast, we're looking at being in a position a lot better than historically would be for that part of the year. And if we go over to the access graph, much the same, not radically different. Some signs of that kick up in March. So seeing this is the last graph, I now want to go back and talk about this kick-off in March. So this is Access's forecasts. Every forecast anyone makes has error bars around it. And if we're forecasting weather, the error bars around a forecast 4 months out is higher than the error bars around a forecast 1 month out. So as I sit here on the 1st of December and look at that kick up in pasture occurring in late March, which, as I said, would have to have come from rainfall events either late Feb or early March, I say that's nice. It's a lot nicer to see that than if it was going horribly the other way. I'll be far more excited if it's still there on when the forecast is redone on the 1st of July, because instead of it then being 3 months out, it's only 2 months out. So the error bars have narrowed.
So you mean January? Sorry, you said July.
Did I?
Yeah, January. You mean? Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. On the 1st of July, I love
1st
July,
of January.
1st of January. On the 1st of January, if that kick up in March is still there, and then we'll see what's happening in April. But if it's still there in March, I'll start to pay a bit more attention to it than I do now. And if it's still there in February, well, my level of confidence has gone to another. You know, it's a quantum jump. So with the forecast stuff, yeah, the closer it gets, the more value you're going to put on it, just because our ability of forecast gets better and better the closer to the time. So in summary, and this could be a summary for Tasmania, East Coast is no different to what we've looked at here today, except for some unusual seasonal impacts because things have been so wet. Starting positions are good. The drop-off is going to occur because of the pastures just can't grow anymore. You're going to have to manage your dead. And there's nothing in the 4 months that would suggest I've got to start thinking about having to do unusual things. And that's really what farming forecast is about. It's that look over the horizon. Is there something coming that would make us think about what we've got to do long term? Do we have to make unusual changes to our systems, or do we have to just make some fine-tuning within it? Currently in Tassie, I said it before, but to me, the biggest issue you're going to have to deal with is how you manage this big bulk of dead feed between now and next autumn. Rather than that, just bear in mind, from my 45 years in the game and seeing big seasons, the bigger the season, the poorer the food quality over summer, and the class of stock who suffer most from that are young stock. Just because you've got a big body of food, do not assume that those stock are going to do that well. The general rule is the bigger the spring, the poorer young stock do over summer, and if people don't keep an eye on that, they could be bitterly disappointed. So there could well be cases where you've got to do some supplementation of young stock in the next 3 or 4 months, just because of pasture digestibility is so much lower as a result of the big spring we've had. Thanks, Tim.
Oh, that's fantastic, Phil. Thank you. I've just put out a little poll with a couple of questions, but we have a few minutes if anyone has any questions about what we've discussed today. So I'm sort of opening the floor for any further questions before we wrap up today's webinar.
I had just one question for Phil, and it was just with that warning with the drought lot. When that drought lot comes up,
yep.
Is it based on historical data, or both current and historical
No.
data?
It's only based on the historical data.
Okay, always on
The-
historical.
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing you see in the whole program that Access influences is that pasture graph, that right-hand graph that we're looking at now that's still up there. That's the only thing that Access creates information on. Everything else, when you go and hit the more pasture details, everything underneath that is based on climatology. So the drought warning only applies to the climatology data.
Yeah, right. Okay, only to the climatology, you're saying? Yeah.
Only climatology. Yeah.
Right.
It's
Yep,
it's those
It's
30
just that
years of
historical. Yep.
it's those 30 years of climatology data that that drives the potential. If you look at it, there's 30 years of data. There's 4 months, 120 days. So there's 3,600 opportunities for the pasture rule to be broken.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? Because it looks at the ground cover on every day in those 30 years.
Yep.
I just had a question
Thanks,
for everybody. So apart from Chris, who I know is using the information, we've got I think we've got a couple of other farmers here. Anybody else using this information currently? I know that various other people who aren't here today are, but I just thought I'd ask that question. If anyone is using that information or looking at other sites. Guess that's a no. No problem. I just thought I'd ask because I recognise a couple of new people on this webinar, so I was just curious.
Tim, just in that, if there's new people who have never seen it before,
Yep.
Farming Forecaster, all one word.com.au.
That's right. Yep.
If you go onto it and down in the bottom left-hand corner, you go in there, it says more information, or it might be in the bottom right-hand corner now. There's more information. There's some very good training videos, 10, 15 minutes. You can just sit through and work your way through the program so you help understand it. There's a section just about the probes that are on the left. There's another couple of sections about the pasture herbage mass. So you can work your way through those and get an understanding of what it's giving you and how you go about it. They're in the process of being updated this week as well.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, there's some great sort of self-help bits in there. But as I say, with our larger project that we're planning, we're delivering across the state. We are very much available to talk about the tool. We're engaging with different groups. So if you're interested in using the tool and want to know more today, please get in touch with us, and please feel free to send me an email or Pete an email. So we're in the current process of talking to a number of groups at the moment. Yeah. So I'm just looking at the chat here just to make sure. So we've got thanks, Chris, for your comments. That's great. Yeah, so I think unless there's any other questions, I think Yolanda might be asking one more thing in the comments. So let's just see. Oh no, she's just given Peter Heading's email there for anyone in the north of the state. Thank you. That's great. So yeah, so what we're doing is we'll look at running. We're going to be running a series of face-to-face workshops as part of the larger project. So we'll be doing those probably in the Midlands, the Derwent, the Fingal Valley, the northeast, Flinders, and maybe a couple of other regions. So there'll be more face-to-face workshops happening where we're putting new sites, but we'll also be running some more webinars for people who've already got sites on the East Coast, Fingal as well. So and Midlands. So we're planning to run another webinar session like this in early March. But if you would like to know any more about the tool and what we're doing, this webinar and the one we had earlier was kind of pitched at the level of people who'd already been involved. So I realise there's some people who are new to it, but we can certainly talk through some of the basics of the tool if anyone has any queries. Okay, so yeah, I'd just like to say thank you everyone for being part of the webinar, and think that's the end of the webinar, and yeah, we'll catch up soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim and Phil, for doing your bit on this
Yes.
too. Yep.
Thank you. Oh, someone we've got another comment here, so I
Cheers.
won't quite close off yet. Bear with me. Oh yeah.
Thanks for that, Tim.
So, no problem.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. All right.
Yeah, thanks, Phil.
Cheers all. Thanks, Chris.
Okay, everyone. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks. Bye bye. Bye bye.